Oyster fishing is declining in Texas because of climate change and overharvesting. The Texas oyster industry has the potential to be worth $30 million or more annually, but it has rarely reached that level in recent years. It's the second day of the harvesting season in Galveston Bay, but the catch was as bad as Romeo Bilcich had seen in 41 years of harvesting.
What can I tell you? I can tell you maybe it's good, but it's not. It's getting worse every year. The product is not here, it's pretty poor fishing.
A few days before the harvesting season began, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department closed about 20 public oyster harvesting areas in the Gulf of Mexico. They left 4 areas in Galveston Bay and 2 areas in Matagorda Bay open to oystermen. Oysterman Joel Gutierrez explains how closures turn open areas into harvesting frenzies.
Closures, whenever they do close the bays down, usually it's because they're running their tests and the bay must have not passed a certain test, which means we're not able to oyster there.
The annual average of oysters caught in Galveston Bay has dropped from about 730 oysters caught per hour between 2000 and 2003 to just over 220 from 2019 to 2022. So how does climate change impact oyster populations? It has to do with the salt content of coastal waters.
We see both drought and rainfall negatively affecting oyster reefs. So oysters kind of like a moderate salinity. They like not too much rain, but not too much drought.
Zach Olson is a biologist at the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department.
With climate change, we're certainly seeing more frequent droughts, more frequent rainfalls, and some of those being more extreme. And so, especially in the past decade, we've seen impacts from both harvest and heavy rainfall, heavy drought impacting those oyster populations.
In 2017, heavy rains and flooding brought by Hurricane Harvey decimated Texas Gulf oyster reefs by reducing the salt content of the water. While in the past 2 summers, Texas experienced extreme drought. Marine biology professor Jennifer Pollock explains how that impacts the intensity of disease infection in oysters.
When you have those saltier, warmer bay waters like we see in the Gulf of Mexico during droughts, we see oysters that have larger disease burden in their bodies. What that means is that they're fighting off all these other stressors and they're not growing as well. So you're not going to have as healthy of a harvest of oysters out of those bays. So it's going to affect the economy of the region, but it's also going to affect the ecology of the reef because these healthier oysters aren't there to reproduce for the next year.
Overharvesting and destructive fishing techniques also cause oyster populations to shrink. To harvest oysters, boats drag an underwater dredge across oyster reefs, collecting reef material that's dumped onto the boat, where oystermen chip away at rocks and shells to gather legal-sized oysters. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association said dredging for oysters destroys oyster reef heights, eliminating habitat for fish and crabs. Scientists estimate at least 85% of the world's oyster reefs have been lost, largely to overharvesting and disease.